Grace United Methodist Church welcomes you to this time of worship. Grace Church welcomes everyone, all people, to know, grow in, serve, and share Jesus Christ. I'm Pastor Paul Frederiksen, called to serve the people of Spencer, the surrounding area, and Grace Church. The coronavirus, have you heard about that? The coronavirus persistently seeks to rule much of our lives, as well it should. Only the most dull among us would fail to give it due respect. We're continuing to see the great difficulty we will experience as the insidious practice of racism has invaded and in many instances has been intentionally inserted into the fabric of our American culture. And then there are the enduring economic realities posing challenges to individuals, families, business, and those seeking help. In such a context, it would be wonderful to be able to get together, to lift our shared voices in song, to pray with one another, to share a cup of coffee, to have a prayer while holding hands, incarnating for one another the presence of Christ. You know, I guess what I've just done is I've given you a list of some of the things that I grieve. But I'm going to think that you can identify with each of those, and you might have some lists to add of what you are grieving in this season of our lives. So to begin our worship, here's a song to remind us that even though distanced, we are bound together. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. And so as we continue our worship, we consider our life together, even though separated. Be a good neighbor, wear your mask. It's not a political statement, it's a spiritual statement. And then we've had some funerals. We will have a funeral. Claire Swanson, father of Brian and Mary Kay, and Bailey Swanson's grandfather. That funeral was Friday, as well as Doug Alexander's from the Milford area, Arnold's Park. I was privileged to officiate he and Helen's wedding 20 years ago, just short of 20 years ago. Monday, the 13th, we'll have a graveside service for Patricia Ron, John Ron's sister, for all those people and more that you might be aware of, whose death you grieve, that the peace of Christ may come upon them in surprising, comforting, and healing ways. Also, COVID-19 continues to wreak havoc among the world, and certainly right here in Northwest Iowa, and perhaps wherever you are, it is also. And so we lift up all those who are dealing with it, perhaps medical people, but it's affecting us far more than just medically. I read this week, too, that some of our difficult conversations about racism might get sidetracked if we confuse racism and prejudice. We might ask someone, are you racist? Oh, no, I'm not racist. But they might be thinking prejudice. Well, actually, we're all prejudiced. In some way, we have prejudged people, events, places, countries, activities, jobs. So we need to be open to those hard conversations. And then the Vacation Bible School virtual lessons were delivered. And I hope if your family receives some, I hope you're having fun with them, even the snacks that were included in the boxes. And as we go into prayer, here's another verse that we'll sing. Before May we worship God, who is to us both mother and father. Give us a little sun, a little happiness, and some work to do. Give us a heart to be with and to comfort those in pain, who are uncertain, who are insecure. Give us the ability to be good and strong, wise, and to extend our freedoms with grace and compassion. And may we be as generous with others as we are with ourselves. And God, don't give up on us. Continue to grant us grace, love, and courage to step forth with actions to move all humanity, to live as one family, all brothers and sisters of Jesus Christ. For it is in his name that we join our voices in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. We share each other's woes, our mutual burdens bear, and often for each other flows a sympathizing tear.
Suddenly, one day, it happened. I stood there in the crowd, cursing its density and anonymity, angry that my feet had been stepped on and no one stopped to ask my pardon. Then it hit me. I felt the life flowing out of me into the bodies of everyone around me, and their life was flowing into mine. I looked into their faces for the first time, realizing that I was not only myself, but I was part of them as well. They and I were expressions of the same force, life, coming from somewhere, housed in these bodies, looking out of these eyes, and then I recognized them. These were the faces of God.
Emotional intelligence, or EQ, for emotional quotient, refers to a person's ability to work with others. Last week we talked about the self-regulation that is required if we're going to be healthy with others. We have to know who we are in order to have healthy boundaries and to allow others room for their opinions within us. And but it also involves not only social or self-regulation, but social competence. There's how we work with others. The Bible is a book about working with others, actually. Last week I talked about that self-regulation. Now, as persons created in the image of God who wanted to have relationships, I believe it's impossible to overstate the importance of this social competence. In our currently socially distanced world, this is of vital importance as we consider our humanness. Now, it's only been in the last 20 years that we've begun to realize how social we are created to be. It was in 2001 that a guy named Robert Putnam published the book Bowling Alone. It was groundbreaking as he considered and named the different ways that what Americans used to do together as social activities, we were now doing alone. Largely on our own and isolated from others, even before it was wise medically to do so. Much of America was put on notice by that book as he stated the importance of being with one another, doing things with one another. He claimed in that text that if a person in isolation that did things alone were to become part of a community of people, that it would cut in half the odds of that person dying within the next year. Revolutionary statement to this day, I believe. For nearly a decade, there have been articles stating to the effect that, and I'll quote one of them, lack of social connection is a greater detriment to health than obesity, smoking, and hypertension. And 3 years ago, a more recent study out of UCLA stated that the United States is living in an age of loneliness. And I'm going to quote that author who said, an invisible epidemic affecting over 60 million people in the United States. Now, in the context of that, we read the Bible that has, in just the New Testament alone, the New Revised Standard Version, has 102 occurrences of the words one another. That's a social statement. One another. We are together. Here's some examples.
Speak to one another, argued with one another, betray one another and hate one another, asking one another, at peace with one another, disputing with one another, saying to one another in anger, calling out to one another, trampled by one another, lay down our lives for one another.
You can go to Bible Gateway yourself and get all 169 references for the entire Old and New Testament of one another. Now, as the Christian church developed through the ages, the message became consistently fulfillment of the great commandment, the first part of which is love the Lord your God. The second part, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, Jesus repeats it 3 times in the Gospel of John, the directive to love one another. In the 13th chapter, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. In the 15th chapter, 2 different places, this is my commandment that you love one another. And I am giving you these commands so that you love one another. Obviously, we don't get it. Because then Paul goes on to command with the love one another in letters to churches. Peter affirms the command. The author of the letters of John affirms it 7 times. Yet here we are. I think I know why it was so frequently repeated. We're in a world where we need to have demonstrations to remind us that all lives, including black lives, matter. There's evidence to the contrary. Here we are in a country where the highest incidence of COVID-19 is among minority communities, and zip codes having a higher incidence of poverty. Pre-existing conditions for COVID-19 seem to be race and poverty. Here we are in a country with amazing resources, and yet, by all accounts, we're lousy at handling coronavirus, especially when you compare us with most of the other countries of the world, except 2 or 3. The other evening, I caught a little bit of a public broadcasting of the movement for women's suffrage. The comment was made that women were given the vote. Doesn't that sound patriarchal? To say, oh yeah, we gave them the vote. Women said, no, we fought 70 years to take it. Quite a difference between being given and taking it. They were persistent for 70 years. And it took them that long to have the recognition of their personhood. And even then, and this was new to me, I confess, that one of the points of negotiation was for the southern states that they didn't want to give black women the right to vote because, and the narrator of the program quoted a senator of the time saying this, because that would be the end of white supremacy. Oh my. a prayer that would be a prophecy fulfilled, but it's not. Okay, so it's no secret. Humans struggle with the command to love one another. We want it to be selective, controlled, measured out like food at some kind of a chow line. But loving one another is not rocket science. It is, or it isn't, a part of how we view other people and how we treat them. It's a theological command of Jesus to be lived out in daily interactions. That makes it a social interaction. It's lived out with other people. So we know we should love one another. Why don't we? Why don't we? The self-regulation necessary for healthy social interaction has to be developed over time. We are not just born with it. We have experiences that actually develop those parts of our brain or not. Prior to coming to Spencer, I was privileged to serve as a member of, in some leadership terms, of two different boards dealing with services for families, especially families with young children. One of our presenters one day gave us some information about brain development that it's amazing. And but I'm a pretty simple guy, so I think I can make it pretty simple. He talked about two different parts of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And the amygdala is the trigger point of emotions and arousal. Let's call it the bank of the emotions. Sad, happy, angry, fear, jealousy, envy, whatever. This guy appears to have a healthy amygdala. Now, if you have an experience that stirs within you a fight or flight urge, maybe like the guy on your screen right now, you have a working amygdala. But the amygdala has to work with the prefrontal cortex, which helps us in reasoning, inhibition, and decision making. Now, putting it simply, if someone hits you, the amygdala says to you, hit them back harder than they hit you. While at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, a different part of the brain, might be processing your next act, like with thoughts like this. Is this person bigger than I? How many allies are near me? How many friends does that other person have near us? Who is there that might see me hit that person? And if I do, will I get into trouble? See, the prefrontal cortex is processing all of that while your amygdala wants to hit them back and get into a row with them. As you look at this next slide, with 11 functions of the prefrontal cortex, consider that we are making it easier and easier for people, especially children, to grow up without social interaction apart from the presence of an adult. We have Little League softball games, but we don't see many children going out with just a pack of kids with bats and balls and gloves hanging off their bicycle handlebars going to play a ball game. Now, one of the settings in my life, for example, that the development of the work of and interrelationship of the amygdala and prefrontal cortex happened was when a group of us got together and played. We had fun and we had fights. And nobody's parents ran out to intervene, at least not until there was some blood. But even then, most of the time, when it got bloody, we would say, we better clean this up before anybody's parent sees it. It was a process of the amygdala working with the prefrontal cortex. When we visited our cousins in town, the entire neighborhood of children would gather after the noon meal down the block by the REC storage lot and play softball. Any disagreements we had to work out, we had to work out on our own. And settlements were not always amicable. Now, it's rare to see that group of kids without an adult going to play. And if an adult's around and provides resolution for differences, the interworkings of the amygdala and prefrontal cortex are inhibited and do not have the exercise they need to grow. In fact, in preparing this, I even found out that primates, that is, apes and gorillas and such as that, the more complex social interaction they have, their amygdala and prefrontal cortex show growth and development. Yeah, even simple activities like negotiating. Should we use somebody's old ball glove for a home plate? Or should we find that piece of garbage that's blowing around and use that for a home plate? All of it provides exercise for the amygdala with the prefrontal cortex. Children who zone into solo video games are not provided the context for that development with the amygdala and the prefrontal. Do you wonder in this time of isolation even if those of us who think of ourselves as adults, do you think that we might be reverting to more elementary methods of relating as we spend time alone without social interaction? Scary thought, no doubt. So while the amygdala will always fight for survival of the self, the prefrontal cortex will seek to have empathy and understanding with the other. Biblically speaking, the prefrontal part of the brain is the part that seeks to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's a lot of processing that has to happen as we determine, they hit me, but would I want them to hit me harder? How can I treat them differently, even as I would like to be treated? Or the letter of James suggests a way of life when the amygdala is reined in by and properly interacting with the prefrontal cortex. When James writes, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. You see, God wonderfully created us with both emotions and will, with amygdala and prefrontal cortex. To love one another is to allow our relationships to benefit from the work of the prefrontal cortex, but it doesn't happen automatically. We must have those settings where it can be developed. Social competence is vital. As the song relates, not alone we conquer, not alone we fall. In each loss or triumph, lose or triumph all. Bound by God's far purpose in one living whole, move we on together to the winning goal. Forward through the ages in unbroken line, move the faithful spirits at the call divine. Gifts in different measure, bless you and take good care of you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look on you with favor and give you peace. Amen. Well, may you have plenty of opportunity to exercise your amygdala and prefrontal cortex this week. I have no idea how we do that in isolation. If you live in a family, you probably have some experiences that way, but may we learn to love one another, even from a distance. Reminder that the sanctuary is open on Sunday mornings, 9 to 11, and any other time during our open hours. We're open regular business hours all week. We can always open the sanctuary. The chapel is available. You're welcome. We do invite people to wear a mask and social distance if you stop in the office, but you're welcome. The Administrative Council has determined that we intend to have some sort of in-person worship starting August the 2nd. And best way to make sure that can happen is social distance and wear your mask. And but we'll be watching, excuse me, we'll be watching the numbers to see how all that goes. Also, a newsletter went out from the office this week, and it's also online. Check it over. It's not too lengthy because we don't have that much going on. But one change that took place after publication, it was tentative that Main Street Market was going to be held 3 Thursdays starting July 30th. And I mentioned that in the newsletter. With the cancellation of the Clay County Fair, Main Street Market was also canceled. But I'm thinking a summer without root beer floats is not a summer. So we might be working on that. Keep your ears open for more words that direction. And meanwhile, continue to reach out to one another by phone, doorstep visits, patio visits, whatever you can do. We need one another in that way. So may the peace of Christ be with you.